My husband said, "Are you doing Zoom?" I said, "No, I don't have to be on television." And then find out, oh yeah, we're all going to be on television. We're being recorded by for YouTube by Root Media. So be your best behavior, y'all. So welcome to everybody. My name is Helen Zimmerman, and I serve as the president of the League of Women Voters of Wake County. We're very happy to see all of you here tonight for this important occasion. We think this is an important topic, and we're just excited about this. The League of Women Voters of Wake County is a nonprofit, totally nonpartisan organization. Our mission is to empower voters and defend democracy. The 2024 general election is right in front of us. November the 5th is today, and early voting starts tomorrow, so I guess I'll be there about 9 o'clock in the morning so I can vote early. But tonight, we're going to talk about the importance of judicial elections. These meetings are what we call timely topics. We do this about 8 or 9 times a year, and we believe that we need to shine a light on the most important issues of for the country today. And we know that we don't know everything. Sometimes you may think that we do, but we don't. So we bring in the experts and talk to them and have them explain things to us so that we can all learn together. And we're very excited tonight that we can do this. And we have partners tonight, which is great. Meredith College, who has put this beautiful venue, and the League of Women Voters of North Carolina. We're so pleased to have our betters be with us and participate. And so I'm going to introduce to you Jennifer Rubin, the president of the League of Women Voters in North Carolina, and she's going to introduce the other folks. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Helen. Can you hear me? Is this good? Yep. Okay. It's a pleasure to be here and welcome you on behalf of the League of Women Voters of North Carolina. The state organization represents 15 local leagues and 2,000 members throughout our state. We are, as Helen said, a nonpartisan organization committed to defending democracy and empowering voters. And that's why we are particularly proud to be co-sponsoring this event with LWV-Wake. I'd also like to recognize Diana Nguyen, who is with us. She is a past president of LWV-Wake and is now the president of the League of Women Voters US. So Diana, maybe stay. This year, every North Carolina ballot features 4 statewide judicial races, 1 North Carolina Supreme Court race, and 3 Court of Appeals races. And depending on where you live, voters may see other judicial races on their ballots, such as district court elections. Since 2018, judicial elections have been partisan. So today's program will focus on the impact of partisan elections. For context, the North Carolina Supreme Court has a 5-4 Republican majority, and the North Carolina Court of Appeals has an 11-4 Republican majority. In addition to the impact of partisan elections, our program today will also focus on the structure of the court and what types of cases are heard at each level. It is incredibly important that citizens understand the judicial elections. The stakes are high. For example, the North Carolina Supreme Court and North Carolina Court of Appeals judges have 8-year terms. So these are very important races. Another reason that being an informed judicial voter is so important is the impact your vote can have. In 2020, North Carolina elected its Supreme Court Chief Justice. That race was decided by 401 votes out of 5.4 million. More than 150,000 North Carolina voters who participated in that election skipped that race. So voting the full ballot and being informed about the candidates is crucially important. Now I'd like to introduce our panelists and our moderators for this evening. Judge Donna Stroud is the senior judge for the 15 judges on the North Carolina Court of Appeals, having served on that court since 2007. She has served as Chief Judge of the Court of Appeals from 2021 to 2023. Born and raised in Kinston, Judge Stroud attended Campbell University School of Law, graduating first in her class in 1988. She was an attorney in private practice from 1988 to 2004, representing individuals, businesses, municipalities in a wide variety of cases. During over 18 years of service on the North Carolina Court of Appeals, Judge Stroud has written over 1,300 judicial opinions and has served on a 3-judge panel in 3,900 cases. Lucy Inman served for more than a dozen years as a trial and appellate judge. From 2010 to 2014, she served as a special Superior Court judge after being appointed by Governor Beverly Perdue. After winning a statewide nonpartisan judicial election, she served from 2015 to 2022 on the North Carolina Court of Appeals. Judge Inman left the bench and returned to practicing law after losing a statewide partisan judicial election in 2022. Before joining the bench, she practiced civil litigation for 18 years, and she now focuses her practice on appeals. Melissa Price Kromm is the Executive Director of North Carolina for the People and North Carolina for the People Action, where she has also served as the leader of a statewide pro-democracy coalition for the past 14 years. The coalition coordinates advocacy in structural democracy, voting rights, campaign finance reform, government ethics and transparency, redistricting reform, judicial independence, and the right to protest and election crisis prevention. She led efforts to pass campaign finance, disclosure reform, voting rights reform, and preventing attacks on judicial independence. Before joining NC for the People, Melissa was part of a successful effort to pass same-day voter registration at early voting sites in North Carolina and pre-registration for 16 and 17-year-olds. Our moderators today are Dr. Whitney Ross Manzo and Lily Barnett. Dr. Manzo is an associate professor of political science here at Meredith College. She also serves as the pre-law advisor, director of undergraduate research, and assistant director of the Meredith Poll. She holds a PhD from the University of Texas at Dallas in political science and methodology, and her general field is American politics. Dr. Manzo's research focuses on imbalances of power and issues of representation, and she has recently published on unaffiliated voters in North Carolina politics and is currently working in the areas of women in North Carolina politics. Lily Barnett is a senior at Meredith, graduating soon. She is a student member of League of Women Voters Wake, and was an intern with the LWV of Wake County. As an intern, she was responsible for social media, where she created a blog post about a Supreme Court ruling on gay rights. Now I'm happy to turn it over to Dr. Manzo and Lily to start our program.
Thank you so much, everyone, for coming. I'm Whitney Manzo, as Jennifer so kindly introduced me as. And just before we get to the panel, really quickly, a brief overview of the court system in North Carolina, just so that we're all on the same page about what we're talking about when we say Court of Appeals. So everyone should know that there are 2 levels of trial court in North Carolina. There are district courts and there are superior courts. District courts handle smaller cases, like issues that have property value under $10,000 or family law. Juveniles also go to district court. Traffic, those kind of smaller issues go to district court. Superior court is another trial court that handles larger issues. So any criminal activities would go to that kind of court, and large property values over $10,000 would also go to the superior court. So those are our 2 trial courts. And then above that, we have 2 appellate courts. So we have the Court of Appeals, which we've already talked about a little bit. That is made up of 15 judges. And then on top of that is the North Carolina Supreme Court that is made up of 7 justices. And some cases will go to that, either the Court of Appeals or the Supreme Court, depending on their topic. For example, if it has to do with the death penalty, for example, someone was given a death sentence in a superior court, that goes straight to the North Carolina Supreme Court. Also, the North Carolina Supreme Court is the only court in the state that is going to issue an advisory opinion. So for example, if the governor has a question about interpretation of the North Carolina Constitution, they would reach out to the North Carolina Supreme Court. So the different courts see different kinds of cases, but of course the North Carolina Supreme Court can ultimately see any of the cases that I have talked about as the highest court in the state. We're also talking a lot about judicial elections. And you should know that many states use other methods for how they choose their judges. So at the federal level, they're all appointed. And there are some states that also appoint. The governor has the power to appoint judges. But most states use elections. The distinction is, are they using partisan elections like North Carolina does have now, or are they using nonpartisan elections, which some states use and that North Carolina used to have prior to 2018. A third method of choosing judges, which many states have, about half of the states have adopted, is called the Missouri Plan. And what that is when an independent commission recommends judges to a nominating commission or to the governor to nominate. And the governor nominates off of that list. And then later that judge faces a retention election. So there's not a partisan label next to their name. And there's not another candidate. It's just, do we like them? Did they do a good job? Okay, yes, then they get to keep the job. No, then we go back to the nominating commission, to the list. So there are many ways of how we get state judges in among the American states. So North Carolina is not unusual in that we have elections. It is unusual that we recently switched to partisan. So that's just a little bit of the background of the court system and how we get judicial candidates elected. If anyone has any questions beyond that, there will be some time at the end for you to ask them. But I know that you're not here to hear me, you're here to hear the panelists. So I'm going to turn it over to Lily for our first question.
Hi, thank you all so much for coming. So to start with our panelists, can you please introduce yourselves, tell us a little bit about your experience, and explain what your definition of judicial independence is.
Hi, my name is Melissa Price Kromm, and as was stated before, I run the Pro-Democracy Coalition here in North Carolina. And, we've been working on these issues for over 2 decades. Our coalition was responsible for the passage of the nonpartisan judicial elections with judicial public financing, which was frankly considered one of the crown jewels. Like, if you had to elect judges, it was considered one of the crown jewels ways to actually elect judges. Unfortunately, our legislature got rid of that over a decade ago. And frankly, I think that has severely impacted our judicial independence and the integrity of our courts. And so that's what I've been working on for the last couple of years, and I'll pass it down.
Hi, my name's Lucy Inman, and as you heard, I'm a former colleague of Judge Stroud's here on the North Carolina Court of Appeals. Before that, I was a Superior Court judge in North Carolina. Before that, I practiced law. I've now returned to practicing law. And I have to agree with what Melissa just said about the former system, which were nonpartisan elections with public financing, because in addition to not having partisan labels, which I'm sure we'll get into more in a moment, with public financing, it was possible for someone who did not have access to a lot of money to be able to get financing to run for office. And so that really leveled the economic playing field for people who wanted to run. You asked for my definition of judicial independence.
Correct.
And that is such an important question. My definition of judicial independence is impartiality, which is an abstract word, but what I mean by impartiality is a judge who is trying to get to the truth The word verdict means truth, and I think justice should mean truth. Judges aren't all powerful. They don't have the power of the legislature. They don't have the power of the governor. So judicial independence also means recognizing the limitations of one's authority. And it really means deciding each case based on the facts, based on the judge's best ability to understand what the governing law is without fear of retribution from anyone and without favor to anyone. That's what judicial independence means to me.
Oh, okay, yes. Hey, I'm Judge Donna Stroud, and as far as my background, in the judicial election world, I have, it's always fun coming to these events. I've kind of done it all the ways. I was a district court judge in Wake County, elected in 2004, so I did, and that was nonpartisan at that point, so I did the election in Wake County, had a primary and a general in 2004, and then I was elected to the Court of Appeals in 2006. So I did that with the public financing program and of course in a nonpartisan election, and had, let's see, I did have a primary, had a primary and a general in 2006. We have 8-year terms. So in 2014, I ran again to stay on the Court of Appeals, and I did it the very best way, which was unopposed. I highly recommend that to everyone. But it is rare for that to happen. And in fact, someone told me that they think I might be the only woman to run statewide in North Carolina unopposed ever. And as best I can tell, that might be right. And then in 22, of course, I ran for re-election again. And of course now a no public financing world and partisan, had a primary. And of course won the election and actually did really well. I got more votes than any other statewide candidate on the ballot, including the Senate races, which is unusual. So, but anyway, done it all the ways. I was in practice, private practice before I became a judge, like Judge Inman now for 16 years. And, now, gosh, I've been a judge for 20 years. So, judicial independence, I agree, I concur with Judge Inman's certainly description of that, is it's just deciding cases based on the law fairly. And, we decide cases in the context of our system has 3 branches of government, right? We have legislative branch, executive branch, judicial branch. And it's important that each of those branches exercises its role, that each branch stays in its lane. That's part of judicial independence, that we are going to just make our rulings fairly based on the law, dealing with each case before us based on its facts, without concern for, what else, for other branches of government or anything like that. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much. So our next question is, most voters aren't lawyers and don't know a lot about the judicial system and don't have any much or any interaction with it either, unless you're a bad driver and have lots of traffic tickets. Why should everyday citizens care about judicial elections?
Well, judicial, one thing that a lot of people may not realize is that, because we do have the 3 branches of government, right? And the branch of government with the most elected officials is the judicial branch. A lot of people may not realize that, but there are more elected officials in the judicial branch than the legislative or executive branches. We have a lot of, obviously, local judges, district court judges, superior court judges. We have clerks of court, which also have a judicial role, obviously the Court of Appeals, the Supreme Court. There are a lot of courts, and we make a lot of decisions that are affecting people's everyday lives. You are much more likely to have some sort of interaction with, frankly, one of those people than you are with some of the others. And we make decisions certainly on the appellate level that also, we're at the Court of Appeals, we're an error correcting court. That means, we are following the law. We're not creating law. We don't have the authority to overrule cases of our court. And obviously the Supreme Court sets the final interpretation of the law in the state. But we are working to make sure that we have a uniform interpretation of the law across the state, and to make sure that there have not been legal errors in the trial court that have affected the outcome in cases. So we're trying to maintain that uniformity across the state in compliance with the law. So we have some cases that do affect other, precedential cases, that other courts have to follow on the Court of Appeals. And so they can have some very important effects.
I've thought about that as the most number of elected officials in the state. And, you don't have to be just a bad driver to end up in court. If you're getting divorced, if you're adopting a child, if you have a dispute with your landlord or your employer, people don't go to the courthouse because they're having a good day. And if you are in the justice system and you aren't a lawyer, and you're feeling very vulnerable, it's so important that the judge who's making the decisions is someone you can trust. Serving as a Superior Court judge for 4 years, I didn't realize really until I got to the Court of Appeals how much power trial judges have. They find facts, they make decisions that are very difficult to overturn on appeal. And that's because they were there, they heard the evidence. And the appellate courts don't just overturn cases easily. When I got to the Court of Appeals, I realized just how important words are in every decision that our appellate courts issue. And as Judge Stroud said, at the Court of Appeals, where she serves, where I serve, the Court of Appeals is an error-correcting court. It's not likely to say what the law is. There are cases that are called cases of first impression, where the Court of Appeals does say for the first time, this is what the law is in this context. Much more of that happens at the Supreme Court. Whether it's the amount of your utility bill, your right to vote, your reproductive rights, your rights to marry who you want to marry, your rights to have the protections under the North Carolina Constitution and the federal Constitution, all of those rights, and in those cases that are cases that set precedent for voting, for marriage, for reproductive rights, when those decisions are made, it doesn't matter that you weren't a party to that case. They affect you. It matters a tremendous amount.
You're absolutely right. State courts, and more importantly, our state constitutions, have a key role in protecting our individual rights and freedoms. And that's even more so now that the U.S. Supreme Court is kicking everything from abortion access to redistricting down to the state courts. In fact, 95% of all cases go through our state courts. State courts have the power to change lives. And so that's when I realized that, and I realized all the different issues that our state courts work on. I was like, we've got to tell voters about this. We've got to let them know about all these court cases. So you'll learn about it a little bit later in the program, but we created a website called Why Judges Matter NC. And it takes all of these issues, whether they be reproductive access, environmental issues, education, democracy, economic and labor issues, and we show you the court cases so that you can see how big of an impact these state courts can have on you. I was walking around my neighborhood a month or two ago, and a mother came up to me in tears. And she was just like, my daughter doesn't have a fifth grade teacher. Half the kids at our elementary school didn't have fifth grade teachers. And she came to me because my daughter didn't have a teacher for most of kindergarten. And as we've heard before, like our education system in North Carolina is woefully underfunded by our legislature. And, I care about this issue. I'm a mom and I've got a child in elementary school. So as a voter, if I was to check out our website, Why Judges Matter, and see, I would click on that education button, and I would learn about a case called Leandro, and that's about education funding. That's going on right now, and that would be my impetus. Okay, I have to go vote, and so.
Thank you. So can you explain more about the different kinds of judicial panels that rule on issues? When is it one judge? When is it 3 judges? And when is it a full court?
Right, so is that on?
No.
Okay. Is that, okay, there we go. Very good. Okay, so the different levels of court, our trial courts they decide cases with one judge. So our district courts and our superior courts, they're just like when you see courts like on TV, something like that, you see a jury sitting over there in the jury box perhaps, and witnesses sitting up there testifying. That is a trial court, and there's one judge presiding in a trial court. So that judge is going to preside over that trial. There are also situations where that judge is going to make rulings independently. They have different types of hearings. There might be a jury, but the judge is making rulings on different legal issues and sometimes different factual issues, depending on the type of case. So our trial courts all operate with one judge making those decisions. So then we have, about, I think, I know you may know the numbers, but about 3 million or so cases come through our trial courts in North Carolina at this point. It's just a lot of cases. Then if a party in one of those cases, and some administrative agencies as well, have their own hearing processes, but I'll just talk about the trial courts here. Someone wants to appeal. They think there's a legal error made in their case. When they can file a notice of appeal, and that's how something gets to the Court of Appeals. And we'll have around probably about 1,000 appeals filed each year. So as you can see, the vast majority of work goes on in the trial courts. It doesn't make it to the Court of Appeals. And so we hear cases in 3 judge panels. There's 15 judges on our court, and we sit roughly for a new panel about every 2 weeks. We get a set of cases, usually 12. Every 2 weeks. And those panels rotate over time. So I don't sit with another judge like all the time. We have a statute that says that our panels are going to rotate randomly over time so that each judge sits with every other judge as much as we can work it out practically over time. So those panels are going to rotate continuously. So we sit in 3 judge panels. We hear our cases. If you are interested in how we do that, you can look on the nccourts.org website. You can see there, we have electronic filing at the court. You can look up briefs, records, our calendars, our dockets. So you can look on there and you can see what's being heard. And we also stream our oral arguments at the court on YouTube. So you can go on YouTube and you can look at oral arguments at our court or the Supreme Court. And of course, we have them on there archived also, so you can look at previous arguments. So you can see what we do there. So that's at the Court of Appeals, the 3 judge panels. We then issue written opinions. All those written opinions are also available. You can look those up. And then if someone then wants to take that on to the losing party in a case at the Court of Appeals, might ask the North Carolina Supreme Court to review the case. Now, they used to have a right of appeal based upon a dissent. That is, we have 3 judge panels, and if 2 judges went one way and 1 judge went the other way, they wrote a dissent. The party who lost could appeal to the Supreme Court based upon that dissent. That is just recently changed. So there's not a right of appeal based on a dissent anymore for cases that were appealed after a certain time. So it will just be purely discretionary for the North Carolina Supreme Court to take cases. but a person can then ask the Supreme Court to review that case, and then the Supreme Court may or may not grant review of the case. They typically grant a very small percentage, just like the United States Supreme Court grants a very small percentage of the cases that people ask it to review. And of course, at the Supreme Court, the whole court hears the case. So those are all done by all the justices hear those together.
I'm going to add just a little bit to that, but thank you for doing the heavy lifting because that's a lot. That is a lot. And I will say, Judge Stroud was a district court judge before she came to the Court of Appeals. I was a superior court judge. I never knew how hard district court judges work until I was on the Court of Appeals. They are, district court is often referred to as, the less serious cases, but district court judges decide custody of children. District court judges decide things that really you can't put a dollar sign on, and the judges have to do it without a jury. In Superior Court, the juries usually make the tough decisions, and the judges are more calling the balls and strikes. There's one instance in which, or there's two instances in which Superior Court judges do decide cases in panels of 3. One instance which the public doesn't see is when law enforcement wants to get a search warrant to conduct, and I'm terrible at technology, and it's been 10 years since I've served in this role, but when law enforcement wants to get some sort of wiretap or the most invasive kind of surveillance of someone's mobile device, not just one judge, but 3 judges need to hear the evidence and decide that there's probable cause for that. So that's one instance. The other instance in which 3 Superior Court judges decide cases are when the constitutionality of a statute is questioned. And you may remember that there's been several cases in North Carolina, but the most recent case was about the redistricting, the districts of our House and Senate seats in North Carolina, and whether or not the districts that were drawn by our legislature deprived voters of their equal rights to vote. That case started out with a 3-judge panel in Wake County. That 3-judge panel made over 100 findings of fact and made a record because, again, the trial judges make the findings of fact, and reached a legal conclusion that I think it was that it was non-justiciable, that they couldn't decide it. Anyway, they did not grant relief. It was then appealed to did it go through the Court of Appeals? I can't remember. I know the legislature changed that law. It used to be that they went to the Court of Appeals, but no more. They go straight to the Supreme Court. So then that went to the Supreme Court and was decided, and well, then it was decided again when we had a new Supreme Court. But those are the only 2 instances in which Superior Court judges don't make decisions on their own.
Thank you. So my next question is, as a judicial candidate, obviously, Melissa, you still might have some input even if you weren't a judicial candidate. How have you navigated campaigning for the support of your party while still promoting impartiality?
You want me? I can say more than you because I'm not a judge anymore.
Yes, okay. Let's see. Yeah, campaigning for judges is a very strange process. And, as far as the involvement of the political parties, I'll say that even when the races were nonpartisan, The parties have always been involved in North Carolina, both parties. I mean, I don't believe anyone has ever run for certainly one of the statewide offices in North Carolina, and they were not being affiliated with either the Democratic or Republican Party.
Our legislature makes sure that's. the
Yeah,
case,
I mean,
right?
there's a lot of reasons for that, but that's kind of how it, as a practical matter, that is the reality that we must deal with, right? Even when the races were nonpartisan, that was the case. And, and part of the reason, I think, for, even when the races were nonpartisan, the parties both had to work to let people know who their candidates were, right? I mean, obviously, both of the parties were putting out information saying, these are the Democrats, these are the Republicans, because people want to know that. I mean, polling shows and consistently, I found, people, they want to know that. Even if it's a nonpartisan race, that's the first question they have. When I was running, I think this was when I was running for, can't remember if it was 2004, 2006, nonpartisan election. My mother was working at a poll, and there was a primary, so it's a nonpartisan primary, which completely confuses people, right? Because normally you have a Democratic primary, Republican primary. So mother's working at a poll. Lady walks up to her, and she gives her the card, and she's explaining to her about the race and whatever, tell her about me. And the lady says, what party is she? And my mother says, well, she's a Republican. And she's like, oh, well, she's not on my ballot because, I'm a Democrat. And my mother explains, no, this is a nonpartisan primary. So, everybody is on every ballot. So you can vote for anybody on there. And so the lady's like, okay. And she goes and she votes. She comes back out afterwards. She comes up to my mother and she says, well, I voted for her. She was on my ballot. So she must be a Democrat. So it's like, all right, fine. My mother doesn't know what I am. All right. So it's confusing. The nonpartisan elections were confusing. And everybody else, the parties were involved to the extent of trying to let people know who their candidates were. The involvement is increased, I think, with it being partisan, certainly. But a lot of what judicial candidates do, we are more limited in obviously what we can say about things. And we do spend a lot of our time when we're campaigning just simply going around explaining what especially the Court of Appeals is. A lot of people never heard of it. So people who are running for the General Assembly, they don't have to go around and explain what the legislature is, right? Hey, I'm running for the House. And people are like, the House? What is that? What does it do? They don't have to explain that. They just say, I'm in district whatever, and these are my positions on things. So for judges, it's an interesting process because we spend a lot of our time explaining our qualifications and just kind of what our court does. So it's a very strange process.
I agree with everything that Judge Stroud just said. And the difference between nonpartisan elections and partisan elections, I think, is tremendously important, even though the political parties are always involved to some degree. I ran for a seat on the Court of Appeals in 2014, and maybe Judge Stroud doesn't know this, but I'm pretty sure she does. She ran without opposition that year. And one reason that there was no opposition to Judge Stroud was that I and then Judge Mark Davis, who was running to keep his seat on the Court of Appeals, did not want to be tethered to somebody running against this incredibly qualified and experienced and impartial judge. We didn't want to have on our wagon somebody who was not seeking the judicial independence that we felt was important. And that is a testament to Judge Stroud's merit. As far as navigating, when we had nonpartisan elections, I'm a lifelong Democrat. I served as a Superior Court judge and never asked a lawyer, what's your party affiliation or, anybody in court. But when I decided that I was going to run for an open seat, that means someone was retiring, knowing it was a nonpartisan seat, the first people I called, other than my close friends, were all Republican retired judges and lawyers. Because I thought, if they think I can be fair, I'm feeling confident about this race. And if they will endorse me, we can really tell the public, this is an independent judge. This is an independent judge. Now, when the races became partisan, I can tell you, calling back some of those same people, asking them, you supported me before, would you support me again? Well, no, I mean, it's like asking somebody to cheat on their spouse. And it puts very, very uncomfortable. It's very, very uncomfortable when you have partisan politics involved. Also, and I'm sure this is the case in the Republican Party, certainly in the case of the Democratic Party, people running for the legislature, running for the executive branch, can talk about their policy goals, can talk about laws they want to pass, things that they want to make different about the law. Judicial candidates can't do that, because as soon as they do that, they've shown that they're not going to be impartial if that case comes before the court. But I would find that within my political party, people were very frustrated that I wouldn't carry the water, that I wouldn't say all of the same goals that the other Democrats were saying. And and then not Judge Stroud, but I would say some other Republican judicial candidates would carry some water for the Republican Party. And then I would get, well, they're doing it, why aren't you doing it? And it just doesn't work that way. But it has to be navigated. Judge Stroud really has navigated it every single way. And I will say another effect of partisan politics in the judiciary, and she does not have to respond to this, is that Judge Stroud is so independent that the members of the Republican Party who wanted to have total control of the Court of Appeals decided that Judge Stroud was too independent and recruited someone else to run against her in a primary in 2022. And 3 of our colleagues on the Court of Appeals supported this person who had none of the qualifications of Judge Stroud. Judge Stroud won that primary because word spread like wildfire in the legal community of what was happening. But if she had lost her seat, there would have been no barrier, in my view, between the politics that happens in the other branches and in the court. And it's really important whether you're a Democrat or Republican. It's not going to work out if judges aren't independent.
I'm not a judicial candidate, so I can't speak directly to this, but what I've always told folks is that judges don't wear red robes or blue robes. They wear black robes because they're there to uphold the rule of law. And that's what we need to remember when we're thinking about judicial independence. I unfortunately think that the move to partisan judicial elections has been incredibly detrimental to the judiciary and created at least not only in the public's perception, more partisan courts, but I think in reality, what we're seeing. And it's been incredibly challenging to watch that break, and that break in checks and balances. I believe it's led to some very bad decisions. We've had entire decisions that went from like a Democrat, led Supreme Court deciding it one way, and then an election happens, and the next thing you know, voter IDs overchanged, partisan gerrymanders overchanged. These type of things like shouldn't happen. Like if you're there to uphold the rule of law, then uphold the rule of law. Don't use the courts for a partisan game. And I feel like, especially with those overturned cases, we've seen an injection of partisanship into our courts.
Thank you. And for our final question, what are some sources of information that you would suggest to voters who want to make informed decisions about what's happening in the judicial polls or at the polling booth about judicial elections?
So I've talked about this before, but please check out our website, Why Judges Matter NC. It has all sorts of information, nonpartisan judicial voter guides. It goes into depth about the different issues that are in front of the courts. Like I said, I'm a mom. I was like, oh, I want to click that education button to learn more about education. You might be, oh, I want to learn more about how the courts impact environmental justice or reproductive access. And I think that's what we really need to do right now. It's like, our courts are deciding some pretty big cases. And as a voter, we need to be informed about that, and we need to be voting down ballot. Like, you have a lot of power in this state. You get to elect these judges. Don't cede that power. Learn everything you can about what these issues are that are in front of the courts, and then make your decision.
I highly recommend, is this working? Yeah. I highly recommend the Why Judges Matter website as well, the NC Courts website that gives you information about judges. I also recommend a nonpartisan voter guide. I don't know if the League of Women Voters publishes this. It's one of the most objective pieces of material you're going to see. It has a description of each candidate that candidate has submitted. That candidate has submitted their length limits and all that, which you see what a candidate has chosen to write about themselves. You see what a candidate's background is. That gives you so much information about that candidate. And I just beg of you to please check whatever your political affiliation is at the door when you go to vote in judicial races. There are some decisions that judges I highly respect and I think should remain in their seats. There are some decisions that those judges have written that go against every policy wish of mine. But they came by it honestly. They made a decision and they followed the law. I get concerned that we are looking at the courts like we look at the legislature and say, well, if this judge wrote a decision that went a way that I don't like, I'm not going to vote for that judge, because that's not about judicial independence. You need to look at, if there's a decision on the Court of Appeals or the Supreme Court, if a dissent is written, that means another judge is disagreeing. Nobody's got the time. I know you're not lawyers to go read these decisions and these dissents. But if you hear about one case that seems to be having a lot of impact, like the Leandra case on education or the partisan gerrymandering case, do what you can to see if the candidate seems trustworthy to you is most important, I think. But again, the League of Women Voters Guide is very important information, because you can tell a lot about a candidate from what they say about themselves. Thank you.
The link to that is vote411. Is it .com or .org? Vote411.org.
Yeah, those are all good sources. And I would also point out, you may have just gotten something in the mail recently. You might have thought it was junk mail. I hope you didn't throw it away. But there is a North Carolina Judicial Voter Guide for the statewide races. Then those candidates submit, again, those little brief biographical information and information for that. So if you didn't throw it away, if you keep that, it's not junk mail. I think it's online also. For the statewide races, that's a good place to look. But these other voter guides, of course, address other races that you have, local races and whatever. And yeah, just, educate yourself on what the judges are actually doing. It worries me that, especially nowadays, there's so many things that, there's, coverage of cases. I mean, we write these long opinions and I know no one is going to go read all of these things, right? I understand that. You just can't do it. But sometimes coverage of things is not exactly clear. It's sometimes my husband there'll be something in the newspaper about what the Court of Appeals did. And, he's reading the newspaper and he'll say, oh, were you on this panel for this thing I just read about? And he'll tell me a little bit about it. And I'm like, not sure. And then I'll read the article and I'm like, huh. And then I'll look it up and it's like, oh, I was on that case, but the description of it was such that I didn't recognize it until I went and looked it up. Now, that doesn't always happen. Sometimes the coverage of them is good and accurate, but sometimes it's not great. And that's even for news articles. So some of the stuff you see, it's like, just if you see something really strange, follow up on it and see if it's real. But these are good sources, though, to find out about the judges. And I would also say to all of you, you are now more informed than most people by far about judicial elections and where to find information about them. So I would encourage you to let your friends know about that. If they haven't thought about the judicial races, they might be thinking, about other races on the ballot that people are interested in right now, and they haven't given a lot of thought to the judicial races. So, let them know that, hey, there's some other stuff on there. It's really important. You need to find out about it. And, help us get the word out about, where you can look up your information so that you know who you're voting for. And it's not just, who's got the prettiest name. There's one of the other judges on the court who told me that her mother, who's elderly, and she was talking to her mother about how she, decided on who to vote for. And she said, well, I like to vote for women. And it's like, no. Okay. And she said, well, what if there's two women running against each other? She said, well, I vote for the one with the prettiest name. So that's not a good thing to do. Okay. So thank y'all for coming and being interested, and please help us educate everyone.
Yes, and thank you so much to our panelists for joining us. I just want to echo, definitely please flip your ballot over and do the down ballot races. We know in political science that the drop off is enormous for judicial elections, down to where we get maybe 6% of voters finish the ballot and get to the end. So please don't leave these ones behind. In fact, skip the top one if you're going to skip one and go to this one. Maybe you don't like either of the candidates, but you can like judges, right? So anyway, please fill out all of your ballot. Right now we have about 10 minutes for Q&A from the audience. So if you'd like to ask a question, please raise your hand and Lily would be happy to bring you a microphone.
Not this cycle, but previous cycles, there's been a lot of talk about term limits. And the Sixth Amendment says speedy trial for criminal capital cases. This case that's gone on for 18 years, can't the judiciary draw the line and say, okay, here's the deadline, folks, best in your statement, your final statement, get it done.
Are you talking about the Leandro education case? Well, that is really frustrating, isn't it? Really, really frustrating. The case went on for so long that I just forgot David's last name. Judge David Lee, who presided in that case and wrote the I believe the Superior Court opinion ordering the school system or the legislature to appropriate funds, has since passed away from cancer. Leandro himself is a practicing attorney. Okay, he got a good education. went to law school. He's a practicing attorney. That case involves issues that have not been decided before in North Carolina. And the most difficult issue is when the legislature asserts that it and only it has the authority to decide how it spends the people's money. Can another branch of government, the judiciary, tell the legislature how it has to spend its money? It's, despite the fact that I'm as frustrated as you are, and I think it's just abominable that we could have this billions of dollars in a rainy day fund and have these woefully underfunded schools, it is not an easy question to answer. Judge Lee worked very, very hard on answering that question. The North Carolina Supreme Court worked very, very hard on answering that question. And it issued a decision that I don't expect you to read, but I read and I thought was very well reasoned. There was a dissent. It just so happened that within a few months after that decision was issued, we had an election, and the makeup of the North Carolina Supreme Court changed. And I believe it was the first time I'm aware of in history that the North Carolina Supreme Court, in its new makeup, decided to rehear the case, maybe at the request of the party that wasn't happy with the old decision. And they decided it differently. And reasonable minds can disagree. It's frustrating, but the Speedy Trial Act has to do with criminal trials. So these are not easy questions. I will say that. No matter what you think, they're not easy questions.
Melissa, I'd like you to comment first on my question, and then the two judges comment as candidates. We've seen a rise in dark money coming into judicial races, Robin Hudson's case being one of the more prominent cases. And that puts a lot of pressure on the judicial candidates themselves. And I just wonder, what can we do to lessen the impact of dark money in judicial campaigns? Because that threatens the legitimacy of the judicial independence, among other things. And then the two judges, would you comment, did any of your races see dark money coming into the race?
I would return to full judicial public financing, and we've recreated a new form of judicial public financing that would be it's more like a hybrid, and it would be able to continuously fund in a legal way to keep up with the reality of our new dark money world.
And we can thank Citizens United, the decision by the United States Supreme Court for that dark money. I don't know about Judge Stroud because she's run unopposed, but actually, no, I am remembering some very dark money, some very, very dark money. And I'll let her address that, except I will say some of that dark money was raised from sitting judges, and that is wrong. And that is illegal. And I don't know why nothing has happened. But in my case, I found myself and another justice on the Supreme Court the subject of television commercials of someone who was afraid to let her child go out trick-or-treating because I was doing favors for sex offenders. I was a friend of pedophiles. and here's a picture of a pedophile, and here's my picture. And I think the estimate was those cost about $5 million. So I couldn't possibly raise that much money. I honestly think the partisan labels matter a lot more in judicial races than the dark money.
Yeah, I guess I did have a little dark money. And with some groups, certainly in the primary that I had in 22. And so, which is a lot more of that at the Supreme Court level. It is certainly less common at the Court of Appeals level. So I don't, probably that's I teach judicial process at Campbell Law School, and I always include a piece in my classes about judicial elections. And for many years, I got to say that elections in North Carolina hadn't been quite as nasty as some of the others in some other states. And I don't get to say that anymore. So sadly, we have joined some other states in that particular manner. If you're interested in that, by the way, a good place to look up information on that is the Brennan Center at NYU Law School. They have a website. They have a portion of that focusing on fair courts, and they kind of keep a tally of all of these things going on in the various states. It's kind of depressing to look at. But it's a place that you can look to kind of see how that is developing. But and what we can do about it, gosh, I wish I had the answer to that question. I would be like, that would be amazing. Because of the particular, we have, of course, Citizens United, and then we also had the public funding of the judicial races ended as a result of another Supreme Court decision coming out of Arizona challenging their public financing scheme. And part of that program was held to be unconstitutional. And so as a result of that, ours, as a practical matter, sort of had to end, because with that piece taken out of it, it just couldn't work as a practical matter. One little interesting tidbit on that, I actually participated in a League of Women Voters Forum one time, actually in Texas. And there was a group there that wanted to do a forum for candidates who had been elected in publicly funded, nonpartisan elections, and they wanted women who had been elected in those elections. And so this was a long time ago, after I was first elected to the Court of Appeals. And so I went to that forum, and it was me and someone you might have heard of named Kirsten Sinema was the other person who had initially been elected in that type of election. So yeah, it was nice, and they're gone right now. And I don't have a good answer.
So if you want to learn a little bit more about how to reform the courts, please check out our Blueprint for a Stronger Democracy report. It's at ncforthepeople.org. We have a whole section on judicial independence. It includes a return to nonpartisan judicial elections, a new form of public financing, and recusal reform. We actually don't have recusal reform in the state, and other things like disclosure reform too.
All right, we have time for one more question.
Yeah, sorry, we're out of time now, so sorry. But you all had very awesome questions and very awesome answers.
And anybody wants to ask me a question, I'll sit around here.
I just want to thank you all. These are excellent, wonderful panelists, wonderful moderators, and really appreciate all of your insight and your candid response to these issues, and sharing this information. It's so important, and we hope everybody will vote their full ballot. And thank you so much for coming. Now turn it over. Helen has some final words, but let's thank our panelists and our moderators.
I have a few remarks on some other little things here. We've been hearing about why judges matter in North Carolina, and we've got this up here on the screen. It's really, really important. This website, I couldn't read all of it, but some of it explains how courts wield significant influence, making decisions that shape the lives of North Carolinians in profound ways. And also, we did find that part of it is the Judicial Voter Guide, which the league has been depending on for a long time. This directly from the North Carolina State Board of Elections, outlining all the judicial contests and the candidates running for those positions. It's really worth time for you to look at these websites. And Melissa, we really thank you so much for this. So here's the magic that we do. Vote411.org. This is the League of Women Voters Education Fund election information website. This is your total 2024 election guide. All of the information that you need to register to vote, early voting, election day voting, and absentee ballot voting. National, state, and local leagues contact the candidates to put their information on vote411.org so you can see what the candidates have to say about themselves to help you make educated decisions about voting. And the last slide here is about the next timely topics. The 3 timely topics that we've had this fall, the first one we had last month was on abortion, this one is on judicial, and the next one is going to be on extremism. This is going to be extremism and its effect on democracy. This is kind of a regular way that we do it. It's bring your own lunch meeting at the Highland United Methodist Church on November the 19th at 12 noon. Our guest panelists are Tom Baker IV with Princeton University's Bridging Divides Initiative and Joseph Winnicke Leiden with the Southern Poverty Law Center. You can register online at LWV-Wake.org, and we continue these timely topics through the winter and the spring months. So we're going to have more of them coming up too. So thank you all so much for coming. We have a little something for the panelists and for the moderators up in the far up there, little present. And we want to really thank our partners, Meredith College, so graciously contributed our 2 moderators and the venue, and the League of Women Voters of North Carolina, because your financial support made it possible for us to have all this wonderful food, and whose technical assistance we really couldn't have done it without. So I think there's one more thing I have to say. The women's history. Yes, ma'am, you're up. One more thing.
One more thing, sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
We would love it if y'all went next door to the alcove as you grab more food on your way out, because there's plenty. So please grab more food. Please check the alcove next door for a history exhibit about women in science. I don't know if you all know, but many Meredith students and women from North Carolina were part of the human computers that sent us to the moon. So there's an exhibit out there about the North Carolinian women, including Meredith alums who contributed to that effort. And we would love it if you went out there and checked it out. But thank you so much for coming.
You've been a great group. Thanks so much, everybody.
Grab more food. Yes. Yeah.
But I want to come to this one. I want to be great. Thank you so much. Oh, thank you. Someone else.